Hi everyone, welcome to this tracker webinar around candidate onboarding and candidate re-engagement. My name is Matt Sansbury, I'm the head of the UK Client Success team. I really look forward to kind of taking you through the webinar today. So some of the things that we're going to be covering today, we're going to be looking at designing onboarding web forms, creating custom form packs to send out, being able to create an onboarding sequence for new candidates, but also how we can use sequencing and web forms to re-engage with your candidate database as well. With that said, some of the items that we're going to be going through today, they form part of the tracker modules that are both the automation and the onboarding packs. If these are things that you don't have access to, please feel free to either get in touch with myself, your customer success manager, or our support teams who can assist you. One of the things we've learned with, especially with new tracker customers, is that we're finding that a lot of their onboarding and kind of registration for new candidates is not only long and kind of pages and pages worth of documents, but also they become very, very manual as well. One, this causes extra stress on yourselves because it creates a lot of cut and pasting, a lot of manual work to get records introduced and also updated as well. But also when we flick it around to a candidate perspective, we're finding that candidates are having to enter and give a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of time before they've even been guaranteed of any potential roles, interviews, anything that's going to be worth their time. One of the things we always do and try and challenge some of our tracker customers to do is go through your own candidate engagement journey. Sit in their seat, register for yourselves, actually have a look at the hoops they have to jump through just to get registered with yourself. You might find there are steps that you might want to reduce, remove, just to make that life kind of easier for them as well. Now, we're not saying that you shouldn't be collecting data because, as we all know, data is very, very powerful. But you may just want to think about what data you are collecting and when. You may want to think about splitting some of these onboarding forms into different sections. One that collects the very basic data. It might be after you've done certain aspects or certain actions within your process. It could be a screening call. And once the screening calls are done, you might have another form that goes out or some more data collection that happens at that point, but again, much smaller bits. You may also then have extra bits of information that get collected during the job process as well. But really, this is about you looking at your own process and trying to work out what is going to make sure that you're not losing candidates and making sure you're getting as many through the door as possible. There's a lot of times we see when you do have these really big onboarding forms that the candidates might actually just give up and not actually apply. And it's that horrible feeling of actually, are we losing or are we just not getting the range of candidates that we should be? Now, what we're going to be doing today is probably quite a high-level overview of some of these areas. If any of these bits that you want to go more in depth with, then please get in touch with us, have a look at some consultancies, and we can really explore all the options that are going to make your lives easier. Now, we're going to start with the web forms itself. So we're going to look at actually building a web form, looking at some of the actions that go with it, and then also how we can use those to trigger other things and how we actually send them out as well. So most of this is all going to be done in the tools and settings area. Within here, we're going to be using the web form section. And hopefully going forward, you might have lots of other web forms that you create. For today, though, we're going to use the green action button to create a new one. Now, because we're going to be sending this to a candidate, we want to make sure we're associating this to a candidate record. I'm just going to remove the toolbar for the moment, just to give us a little bit more space. Now, as we build the section itself, there's a few bits that we're going to go through. The first bit we're going to look at, so form name and form title. Now, form name can be whatever you want it to be. That is only going to be seen internally. However, the form title is what the candidate will see on their end. So please make sure that this is something that is professional and something that you would want to be out-facing for them as well. We can then move on to lots of actions. So we're going to come back to those once we've actually made the form and looked at how the candidate would actually submit those. At the bottom of the page, we then get into what's called the web form design. Two main bits around it. One of the different fields on the left-hand side, and the actual middle part, where we actually build the form itself with different functions. Now, within the form layout itself, we have two different types of areas. So the one we have by default here is what's called a full width section. But you can add as many of these sections as you like. So we have a full width and a 2-column section as well. I'm going to look and start filling some of these and showing the differences around them. The fields on the left-hand side are actually how we interact with the form itself, and these are broken into 3 areas. Record fields, so those are the normal generic tracker fields that you get in every system. Custom fields is anything that you design yourself against this record. And the other fields are going to be any of your action buttons that you're going to use as well. So to start with, we're going to start putting in some of these. Now, all of these are just drag and drop. You can scroll up and down, but you can also search and filter on these lists as well. As I said, these are just drag and drop. We can start adding those in. And it might be we want to collect some other basic details as well. Might be mobile or cell phone. Might also be email that we want to collect as well. As I said, that was a full width section, so it goes all the way across. But you also may want to use the 2-width ones as well. And for this one, we're actually going to use some of our custom fields as well. Again, we can drag and drop these. We can move them around. And the last one I'm going to use is the where did you hear or the candidate source option. We will go on in a minute and start adding some of the other boxes as well. But for now, I want to kind of walk through and show you what you can do with these fields as well. If I click on the field name itself, we have different options. For example, we can make these mandatory. We can also change the name of what they say as well. You might not like surname. So rather than having surname, we'd have last name instead. And again, we can make those required. You can also make any of these fields read-only as well. Now, although we are building this form for potential new candidates that aren't on the system, as we get on later in the webinar, we'll also show you how you can use these web forms to actually go and collect and enhance the data you already have against records as well. What we'll also do is show you how the hidden one can use, and we'll be doing that with the where did you hear as well. But you can go through those and edit them and change them however you need. As I mentioned, there was a hidden option as well. Now, this hidden one is really powerful. What this allows you to do is actually input data yourselves and actually force data into the system without the candidate being able to update or change it yourself. So for example, you may have this form on your website. What that would allow you to do, for example, is say, well, actually, for every time one of these forms is committed to the system, we always want the candidate source to be website. And that just means that, for example, although you see it on the form here, if we just save it very quickly, you can then actually have a look at how the form is in the web URL. Let's try that one. Let's make sure I actually put it in there. That might help. Let's try that one again. And if by magic, now we can see that that field is actually hidden. The candidate doesn't see that that information is going to go against the record. They can't change it, but it will be committed with the form itself. So if you want to make sure that things like departments, sources, anything that's going to be hard coded against the record, then that hidden field becomes really, really powerful for you to do. What we're going to do though, is we're going to add a few more bits as well. Now, as I said, you've also got the other fields as well. Now, what the paragraph one allows you to do is either enter some pretext, could be images as well. So it could be an area around documents. You may want to change the sizes. You could change fonts, you could change colors as well. But then we also have the option for file uploads as well. And you can have as many of these as you like. What this will allow the candidate to do is upload documents via these forms, and all those forms or all those documents will go automatically into the candidate's document library. As we did before with surname, you do have the option for changing the names as well. Because file upload one obviously doesn't mean anything to candidates, but it might be you have different forms of documents, it could be passports, it could be certificates that you want to do as well. And again, we can make these mandatory if needed. You may also want them to upload CVs or resumes at the same time. If you are uploading those, then please make sure you use the extract document as well, because that will parse the CV or resume at the same time and extract more information from that record. Some of the other bits that we've got as well, we have hyperlink buttons. Again, if I just grab the tracker website, this might be an option to click here for our T's and C's, click here to see our jobs, but anything where you might want to hyperlink them to somewhere else. We can put the URL in there. We can also change the color that we want as well. If you've got anything like skills, you can also add those into the area as well. Now, this won't actually add the whole skills profile. What you have the option to do is choose a skill area, but you could actually add as many skill areas as you like. And that will become then clickable options for the candidate to fill in as well. The final couple of bits are, you might want them to date it. Again, we might want to make that mandatory. And the final one is a signature. Now, the signature one is a very important field. Now, without a signature field, absolutely no problem. You can still use these forms and it will go and update the record or create the record based on what you're doing. What the signature field will do is it will also go and create or update the record, but it will also create a PDF document of this web form as well, and they'll go directly into the records document library as well. So again, something that's really useful to have. So now you've kind of built your web form. Again, feel free, you can play around with it, move it around as well. As I said before, you do have the link here. So if we actually have a look at the final one that we've done. Now, although this says tracker up in the top, you can change the logo and the color in your display settings as well to try and match your own branding. From here, we have the registration itself. And we can actually go and submit that. If I do try and submit it now, because we've got some of those bits as marked as mandatory, they all need to be filled in. Now, before we actually go and submit it, as I said, there are some other actions around that you can do. And we also have this area called web form actions. Now, you do actually have the option to quarantine these. So rather than these forms going straight into the system and either creating or updating the record, you can actually check them first before you commit them into the system. Potentially, you can also add these onto portals as well. So you can make them available inside of the candidate portal, or if you're doing something around the contact, it could be on the contact. Now, typically, with these forms itself, when you send them out, the alerts will always come back to the person that sent the form from the system. If the form was never sent from the system, but it was just used out externally, maybe on a website, then it will either be the person that created the form or the person that we choose as the quarantine alerts here, and they will go to them. Once you submit a form, it will take you to a generic thank you page from Tracker, but you might want to do something a little bit more powerful. And it might be once they do kind of submit one of these forms, you might want to take them to your jobs page or somewhere else that might be of a little bit more value to them. So feel free to put the URL in there. Not only that, you can also do things off the back of the actions as well. So it could be to log an activity, again, for either the person that sent it from the system or the person who is down here as the quarantine alert. Potentially, you can also send an alert to another user. You could also send an email template, and whether that's internally or actually externally to the recipient. And it might be we have an email template just to say that a web form has been submitted, and we can send that to a certain person. We might also send one back to the candidate as well. And again, we can pick that option, and it might be we have an email template in the system already. There's just a very nice thank you one that can then start from there. But in terms of actually sending it out, so although you can use this generic link, and then this generic link could just be on your website, you might also want to send some of these directly from the system as well. Now, if we go and look at candidates, I'm just going to reset that to get all my candidates back. This can either be done singular or in bulk as well, depending on your workflows that you might want to do. So for example, within actual record, using the action menu on the right-hand side, we do have a send a form option. Within this send a form, this will give you access to any of the potential documents or forms that can be sent from the candidate record. As I mentioned before, you can have the option to make fields read-only. So if I prepare this one, and this is one that I made earlier, I have the option to save and send. I might have a template already in there for them to use. But what I can do is I can just enter that form link directly into there. So if I just take the URL for that one, as I said, this one will already kind of show some of the detail that you hold on them, and they can then go and either update or change. Now, in my one, first name and last name were read only. So the candidate can't physically change that, but they can then go and update other fields that you've allowed them to. But rather than actually using the send a form option, if you've already got a really good email template already set up and the form is exactly how you want it, you can actually use the manage templates. There was a quick question about where do we find the web forms to create. This is all in the tools and settings area, and you'll find the web forms just at the bottom there, and it'll allow you to get started to go and build one. But if we are looking at the email templates, we can go to manage templates. You might either create one from new, or if you've already got one like I have here, you've got the option for having a normal email template, but wherever you want that form to be, we have a little button here that is where you can insert that form link. And again, we get the choice of which ones we want to do. What that just means is, if I just save that now, if we go back to the candidate record that we had, rather than going through the send a form option, you can actually just go and choose an email, choose the template, and that link is going to be directly straight into the template itself. What that also allows you to do is, rather than sending it singular, when you're in a search like this, you might run a search, you might already have your hot list, again, depending on how you're trying to find these people. We can use our bulk actions, and we can either send an email with that link already included, or potentially send a form. Now, one of the key things, obviously, it's great being able to send these forms out, but also please make sure you do have this form sends area as well. And that will keep a record of everything that's been sent out, depending on what it is. So this is how you can look at it from a singular version, so looking at it from a candidate record. However, for those of you that have actually got the option to, in tools and settings as well, within the onboarding area, you do have the option here for form sends, and that will include everything that has been sent out to the system, so you can keep an eye on it. If you haven't got this form sends area in your layouts, please make sure to go and check the layout designer, because it will be in there if not. As we said at the start, it might be the way you think about it in terms of what data you collect and when. You might have a very basic web form that collects some data to start with. But also you might have certain parts of your process where you don't actually need to go and update fields in the record, but you might just want something collected. It might be a signature on a page. It might be an agreement to something. That is where you can also use the web documents area as well. So it might be you have certain terms of agreement and things, and these forms can just be sent out for the candidate to sign, date, and this will then create a full document, or a full PDF document against the record for storage as well, and also things you can then view at any point. But you might also think bigger than that. You might have a few different things that you want to collect. And rather than having to send out things singularly, we do also have the option for what we call form packs. You can give the pack a name. It could be onboarding packs, compliance packs, whatever you might need it to be. Again, we'll associate that to a type of record that we want. For this one, it's going to be a candidate. Below we did before, we have things like pack names. Let's go back to that one. The pack name is what the internal version is, and pack title is what the candidate will see. Within that, you can then start adding the singular things that we've just done. So it might be the web documents we've created. It could also be web forms as well. You can change the order of these depending on what you need as well. Just like we did with the web forms as well, they can either, these packs can either be put straight into templates to be used, or alternatively, you can still use the sender form option. But what this will allow you to do, again, I'm not going to go into save and send and do it this time. I'm just going to go and copy the link just to show you what that looks like. The candidate would then receive an area like this, then has the different bits that they need to do. And as they go through and complete them, we can sign those. We could then submit them. From there, they know exactly what they still need to do or what they have completed. More importantly, internally, you'll always be alerted about when those documents have also been received. And as I said, those will go straight into the document library as well. As we said at the start, you might not want to do things just with emails and singulars. You may also want to look at sequences as well. Now, as part of the sequence templates that we have, this allows you to build steps. And this might not just be emails. This could be workflows. It could be text if you have text within your packages. But what it allows you to do is build out tasks, emails, and things that people need to do, whether that be the candidate or whether that be internal. Now, the first bit we have is details. Now, one of the important bits is, because these emails or activities are going to go out whenever the dates come around, if you tell the system that it's going to go out a week later, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, etc., that may potentially fall on a weekend. Depending on your process and depending on your industries that you might work in, you may be happy for things to go out on the weekend. But this option will allow you to say if it can or cannot go out on the weekends. If you select the option that it cannot go out on the weekends, what the system will do is it'll exclude weekends and the counts will just carry over from Friday into Monday in terms of days next. We also have the automation rules as well. Now, although all of our sequences are automatic in terms of once I start a sequence, if I've got something that goes out today and then an email that goes out a week later, another email that goes out 3 weeks later, those will automatically go out on those dates. But at the moment, you may want to start those manually down on your choice. When we come on to the re-engagement part in a couple of minutes, you may also want to use the true automation within the system. And what that means is, based on triggers within the system, that could be a candidate status changing, lapse in activities, the system will automatically start those sequences for you. So please be very, very careful on that in terms of which option you pick. Now, this relates to marketing. So if you've got anyone that has opted out of marketing, they would, in theory, also be opted out of sequences. Now, you may use sequences for mass marketing as well, but you may also use sequences for more personalized approaches as well. And if that's the case, you may want to have the yes option. So actually, it does allow those messages still to go through to people who have opted out of marketing. We can then have a look at different steps that you might want to build. Now, this allows you to have multi-stage bits. So it could be a step one, it could be a welcome email. A bit like we did with email templates, you could also use the form links to add that directly into the email. And for example, we've got this one starting straight away that the sequence is starting. We also might do something internally as well. So it might be we put a follow-up action. And all of these actions can be created by using the steps. And I can choose the step name, the type of step that it's going to be, so email, text, or internal workflow. And the most important bit about when that is going to go out. Now, please remember, this is always how many days or what the time period is away from day 0. It's not the difference between these steps. So please make sure that your days or months or weeks constantly get bigger the further you go down the line. But it might be that we are putting in tasks. So it could be we have an email that goes out there. 2 days later, we have a task that goes against me as the user. It could be 3 days after that. We can actually remind someone else in the team to go and do something as well. That might be by whatever task you've done. And please remember, using the display in display settings, you can actually customize and create custom activities as well that suit your workflows. If you need to, you can also change the times and dates, and also what the subject name is be, but that will then go into their to-do list to do at that date. As you can see, you can start setting up these, and this hopefully will be part of your process in terms of eliminating some of those manual tasks that you are doing. Now, once we've made those, they can either, again, we started individually against people. So when we're within the record, in the activities, you have the option here to start a sequence. And we can choose what sequence it is. And also any of the details about when that one is going to start. But you may also want to start things in bulk as well. As I said, you can click on these, you can click as many as you want. And we have the options here for selecting and starting those sequences against the list as well. Now, that's been great in terms of focusing on new candidates. But one of the big things that we see is we put a lot of focus into getting more and more candidates onto the system. But what we then get is what I call a graveyard database. We often see both, especially on LinkedIn, where people will say agencies will claim that they've got 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 candidates. But actually, how many of those do they actually speak to? How many of those do they actually know what's going on with them? And how many of them are actually good value for what they are in your database? Most of it is just creating noise, a lot of unnecessary records that you don't really need. Now, obviously, from a data protection, security, GDPR in the UK, other bits around the world, you may have your own process in terms of cleaning up that data, and that's probably another call for another day. But where we are looking at trying to engage and get back in touch with the good candidates and really talk about keeping them nice and warm. You can do this quite easily from some of these searches. So where I've got my candidate search, within the filters, Within the marketing area, you do have an option here for last contacted. This is a great one to use, but if I'm trying to target people, so if I'm looking for anything within, that's where I'm looking for someone who has had an activity. But for the purposes of this one, we really want to focus on the overs. That's going to show me anyone that hasn't had this type of phone call or potentially never been contacted in a certain time range. So I could say, show me everyone that has been contacted in 6 months. If we run that, we then get our 9. Now, you may want to even go a little bit more detailed than that, because you might say, well, actually, I want to focus on a certain type or types of activities. I might want to say, well, actually, show me everyone who hasn't had a telephone call in that period. And that will give me a smaller list. A bit like we've done before, I can use my action buttons to either send an individual email, I could start a sequence, depending on what you're trying to do. But more importantly, you might have had these filtered down. It might be obviously a bit more targeted in terms of job titles, skills, anything that you are often kind of searching from a candidate pool perspective. One thing I'd recommend is making sure you save that search. You might also want to share that search with other people. But this now becomes a live list. For example, if we've got Paul Taylor at the bottom here, if I go into his activities, and we'll complete a telephone call for today. Next time I go and run this candidates to call search, rather than being the 6, we're now at 5. But what this will also do is when those time periods then come back around, people will then get added to these. So it becomes a very live list in terms of people you need to call. So not only from a candidate perspective, but think of it from a business development, client perspective as well, that you can use these options for as well. Now, that's great when we're talking about it from probably a very manual option in terms of choosing who and when to send those to. You may also want to use the sequences again and actually use the real power of the automation as well. So within sequence templates, you may have something like a re-engagement sequence, which is something that's trying to keep those candidates warm and fuzzy, but trying to keep your brand and your agency out there as well. Similar options to before, but we might have steps, same kind of things. We might have some of these links in there to kind of get them to update their data as well. Really try and get the database working for you and getting the candidates to actually update their data themselves and trying to keep that data as clean as possible, which then makes it much easier to search and find those good candidates for the jobs that are going. You may also want to do secondary stages. But you might get to an end where you go, actually, if people haven't reacted to anything, you might want to say, well, actually, let's move them into something else. So if they're not engaging with you, they're not replying, they're not filling out the forms, it might be you opt them out of marketing. It could be that you update the status like we're doing now to something else. It could be to do not use. But just something that can potentially clean your database at the same time as well. But this time we're actually going to go and look at the automation itself just quickly. So firstly, who is this sequence going to come from? You might want to have a specific user, but more typically, you might want it coming from the candidate owner itself. Now, as we did with the onboarding one was very manual in terms of choosing who we sent to it and when. But this area here allows us to use what we call true automation. It might be anything about the record in terms of activities, being shortlisted, etc. It can also be about something that happens on the record. So if a status changes, that trigger can also happen. The one we're going to focus on today are these top 2. Because we might say that actually for anyone that hasn't had any activity in 6 months, for example, we want this sequence to automatically send it out to. So the whole idea is that your database is constantly evolving, constantly kind of reusing that data, and hopefully constantly updating it as well. Now, the one thing to really stress about these, if you are wanting to use the true automation, is if I turned it on now, the system would now go and look at the whole system and go and look at any candidate that's had no activity in 6 months. If they find people, great, they will start the sequence. Now, our sequencer never stops. The sequencer will go again in a couple of minutes and go and look for any changes and things that happen. So if that candidate still has no activity, then potentially the sequence will start again. To make sure that you don't have that kind of thing happening, please make sure you use the prevent re-enrollment. What that means is you might say, well, once it's happened once, don't enroll them again in 3 months. So if, for example, the sequence starts today, if we then get that 3 months later in the line and they've still had potentially, you might say, no inbound activity, then that's going to go out, then that system will go out again and start those sequences. So it's great that we've got the sequences going out, but you may also want to be a bit careful about when you're telling the system to stop it as well. As I said, the whole point of this is engagement. And if you actually get that engagement, you might not want that sequence to carry on, because at the same time, you might not want to annoy them with all these other steps. So if you have put some of the forms in those links, you could always say, well, when a form is submitted, stop that sequence. It could be if someone's logged an inbound call. Could be when they've clicked a link in an email, or potentially when they've sent a reply back, and that would then stop the sequence from going out. If you are looking at the email reply, just make sure that those emails are coming back into the tracker system though to actually action. You could also stop it using something else. It might be something about the record. It could be if the candidate status changes to something. For example, if the candidate status changes to place perm, then stop that sequence itself. But if you're happy with all those options, and if you've got it all correct, the final bit would be changing this to yes. And that would then start kicking off the sequencer in terms of hopefully constantly re-engaging with your database every, once those activities become 6 months, for our example. But you might have lots of other thought processes around. As I said at the start, we've only really just scratched the surface with some of the bits that we can do with this. If you want more information, then please get in touch with us, either in the UK or the US, based on where you are, either using our email addresses to get through to us. Just want to say very much thank you for joining today. And again, any questions, please feel free to shout, but hopefully speak to you all very, very soon.